Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello and welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. Here we are dedicated to the art of listening in authentic conversation. We challenge our audience to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of critical self-reflection, in-depth perspective taking, personal transformation, and ultimately social impact. Our 2024 theme has been an exploration of the art of community conversation in today's climate of systemic and institutional racism, anti-racism activation, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and book banning. So I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome to our podcast tonight.
Excellent, excellent. So for many 2024 election voters, the economy was deemed the most important factor in casting their vote. So in this episode, we discuss the economy from a political and a personal perspective, and we also take into consideration economic inequality. So if you just kind of thinking back on the election that just occurred and, the whole idea around, many people voting because it's about the economy and all of that. So the question that we're asking today is, what's the deal with the economy, right? And so there's a lot in that word, right? The word economy. And I would be willing to bet that if I was to walk down the street and ask multiple people to give me a definition of what the economy is, I would probably get a lot of different answers, right? So for all intents and purposes, I'm going to argue that the economy is around the ability of an individual, a group, or a nation to influence or control economic resources, activities, or outcomes. And that power is derived from various factors like wealth, control over resources, productivity, capacity, influence over financial and economic systems. So Mavis and Gail, when you hear the word economy, what is one of the first things that pops into your mind?
Money.
Now, we talked extensively about this, so.
Yeah. Where it's going, where the economy is going and how it will affect me.
And the inequity that has existed in our country for a long time with the economy in regards to socioeconomic groups.
Right, right. I guess I think about myself first, and then I think of how that ripples, into various locations, nations, industries, and so on. But I think that's kind of natural for most people to think, oh no, the price of gas is going up. What am I going to do? Yeah. So yeah, and then as we go deeper, the inequality just really shows itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you think about, I am not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, right? And so I'm probably like the average person, so I kind of look at the economy from two different places, if you will. One of them is that economy up there, that thing that's kind of over my head, right? It's that thing that's up there, and there's a certain amount of control that thing up there has on my life. So for example, people have been talking quite a bit about the price of eggs, and the price of eggs just like went through the roof, and and all of that. So there's that aspect of it, but then there's also the economy in terms of things that I have control over. So I don't have control over the prices of eggs, but there are certain other things in my life that I do have control over. And so it kind of puts me in this mindset of thinking that, yes, there is this big thing up there called the economy, and, things ripple down. As Mavis had said, things ripple down, but I think things can also ripple up. And it just depends on what is your belief system about the economy, right?
So it's the macro view versus the micro view.
Exactly.
And there are different players at both levels.
Right.
Yeah. We all interact. It's messy.
Absolutely. So you bring up macro versus microeconomics. So a very general definition of macroeconomics is the big picture analysis of the economy, including trends in inflation, growth, employment, and wages. Now, when I think about like the election and how people position the economy, I feel like those are the main things that people kind of focus on. What is inflation looking like? I'm paying too many bills at the pump, and I'm paying too much money in the supermarket. But also, is the economy growing? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Like, what is it doing? And then there's the employment factor. Like, am I employed? Am I employed in a role or a job that helps me to pay those inflated bills, right? Where am I, and what do my wages look like? So I might have a job, but do I have a decent wage? Do I have a wage that really enables me to take care of my family? Right. And so when I think about macroeconomics, I think about that space. And I think that that's where a lot of people were coming from for the most part when thinking about, the economy as a decisive factor in the direction that you vote in.
Right. It's kind of like looking at that point where they cross micro and macro, where the cost of living is if it's increasing, are my wages increasing? Can I accommodate that increase in the inflation? And they kind of begin to connect together.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Exactly. So some of those key objectives when it comes to macroeconomics is that idea of economic growth. But at the same time, it's like, is it economic growth for everybody, or is it just economic growth for a certain portion of that everybody, right? And so it isn't, we don't live in a system where if the wealthy are doing well economically, that translates into the middle class is doing well economically, or that the lower class is doing well economically, right? So that economic growth looks different depending on where you are. If you kind of look at this as a spectrum, depending on where you lie in the spectrum, then economic growth just might look different for you. Right.
And it depends on how they slice this. So if they're talking about national growth, GDP, that might be an attractive number. However, you might, like say in the next administration, lose your overtime. That's a serious decrease in your economy. Right. So it depends on the lens that you're looking through and how the economists slice the different stories up and come about those numbers.
Absolutely.
Are good ones tonight.
And then there's the idea of price stability, right? Controlling inflation, controlling deflation. The prices are going up or the prices are going down. But the average person doesn't have any control over that, right? We're the ones that bear the brunt of whatever is happening. So when you think about, for example, the issue of supply chain, right? If you're a business and you have 10 different points in your supply chain, and each one of those has their own sort of financial environment that it's operating in, but you need one of those pieces, a widget from each one of those 10 different businesses in order for you to produce what it is you're producing.
Right.
But when that supply chain, those individual components, the prices go up, like who has control over that? Like what happens when those prices go up? What am I going to do as a business person?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a little
figure out how to make accommodation for the prices going up.
Right, right. I just have a little anecdote. About 10 years ago, I went into a shop here in my small town and I asked the owner, how's business? And she said, not good. And then she said, it's the economy. And I remember thinking, I'm sorry, I don't shop enough. So I was thinking on the micro level, and she was talking about the big picture and how it was affecting really people's perception of what they would have in the future. And it left such a mark, because I don't have control over the economy, certainly. But, you think about your role in it and whether you're, being victimized by it in a way, or whether you have some power in it, and thus the inequality, right?
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And it also depends on what is your belief system.
Totally.
So if you are, think about it. If you are a young person that was raised up in, say, an entrepreneurial household, your view of the economy and making money is going to look very different from somebody who is raised up in a wage earner type of environment, right?
Or a salary and bonus earner.
Right, exactly. Or if you're raised up in a wealthy environment. So all of those environments are going to impact how you think, behave, and believe when it comes to the economy. Right?
Right. And then also under macro, one may not be good for the other, right?
Wait, I'm sorry.
What might be good for one group is not necessarily going to be the best for the other.
That is exactly the point. And oftentimes it's the exact opposite.
Right. They're interrelated, but they're not connected in a way that respects or honors each group.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of employment, right? And so I just created this sort of these contrasting things where in the one household, it's an entrepreneurial household, right? It's these people have their own business and they've, successfully been running their business or whatever. So when they're raising up their kids are going to see that type of thing. Then you have the other, maybe another household where it's the focus is on make sure you get your education, make sure you get a degree, and then you'll be able to get a corporate job. Maybe that's what the conversation is in that household. And then you might have another household where the education might not necessarily be enforced, but once you turn 18, 19, 20, the expectation is that you will now get a job.
Right. And then the styles of spending are different in those different households that you just described. I was just thinking about, when I was working on Wall Street, that people were so connected to their salaries that they would spend way out into the future. When I went on my own, I did not spend past a day of, income. And so that would affect our personal economies for sure. Macro, I don't know, although there are a lot of us in the gig economy now. Yeah.
Exactly. And this conversation makes me think about, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Kiyosaki and the cash flow quadrant. He's one of the people that I learned from like many, many years ago, just really understanding what are the different chunks, if you will. So he broke it down into these 4 quadrants. One is the employee, the person who's, they're basically an employee at whatever level, but they are in fact an employee, right? And what that essentially means is that they're exchanging their time for money. So they're earning a wage, they're exchanging their time for money. Then you have a small business owner, and that might be someone who might have a chiropractic office or, their own medical practice or something like that. And so in that situation, they're owning a small business, but at the same time, if they're not present to manage that business, they're going to have issues, right? And so in both of those, it's really this thing of you're exchanging your time for money, right? And then over on the other side, I'm sorry?
And your skills.
Right? And your skills, exactly. All of that. All of that. All of that. But then on the other side is more the business owner and more in that entrepreneurial space. Those individuals who might not decide, I don't want to be an employee. I don't want to be a small business owner. I want to be a bigger business owner, right? Or I want to go into a network marketing business. I want to have a network marketing business and that sort of thing. So that's a different type of scenario altogether. So the money that you're making or the income that you're pulling in is based not just on you exchanging your time for money. And then the final quadrant is those people who are investors. And so, when you see something like that and you just begin to ask yourself, which one of those quadrants do I actually fall into? But which one do I really want to be in? Mm-hmm. Which one do I really want to fall into? Mm-hmm. Right? So your thoughts?
Wow. I guess if you're very clear on how each of those quadrants functions, you can steer yourself into one or the other. Mm-hmm. I just think that so much of this country, so many people are in the wage earning category without a lot of decision-making power. They're going paycheck to paycheck, and they're beholden to somebody. That's makes your mind shrink. It makes your hope shrink and everything else. Although we need wage earners, I'm sure they would love to be in the investor class, but they, there's many reasons for having a hard time for entering into that class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then there's also people where it overlaps. So you have those individuals, those individuals who work a full-time job, but I also have a business. Like, for example, I have a really good friend who's been a Mary Kay consultant for years, but she's also had like a career, working for the state of New Jersey. She had that career, but then she also had the Mary Kay business. So she's one of those individuals who kind of had her foot in multiple places. Now she gave up and retired from the state job, but she's got all of this business that she's been building up over the course of years so that her income doesn't get disrupted.
Right. That's pretty awesome, but working 2 jobs really, that's rough.
Yeah, that's hard.
It is, but people do it. People do it all the time. I know people who work 3 jobs. I literally know people who work 3 jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is that though? Why, it's right. This relates to the inequality in my mind, at least in some ways, that a job is not enough to live on. And, that ties into the perceptions too. It's like, how much do you think you need? It might not, or it might be more tied to how much you want versus what you need.
Right, and where you want to live, what you want
and
to
where
have.
You want to, yes, exactly.
Right. But shouldn't I be able to decide this is how much money I would like to have because this is the quality of life that I would like to lead?
Yes.
Right?
Oh, do you live in a democracy? Why, yes.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. And it's interesting that when I gave the scenario that you looked at it as her having 2 jobs. She didn't look at it like that. She looked at it like I have a job and I have my business.
And I have a backup and extra.
I have my business.
But she has her own business, right?
Yeah, she had her own business.
Right. She's an employee and she's an entrepreneur both.
Yeah. That's exactly the point.
And being an entrepreneur allows her to retire from the one job that she was an employee, and now she is just totally on her own.
Exactly.
In charge of her life and her business.
So that is an example of one type of personal economy picture.
Right.
Another type of personal economy picture is I have one job. I have a corporate job. I get paid 6 figures and I'm very happy with what I'm doing. And I have my plan for my investments and my retirement. I have all of that in place. But again, it depends on what are the choices that you're making in your life and what are the beliefs that you hold about those choices. Right?
Yeah, that's so true. What you believe is going to happen in the future. Usually you believe that your wages will go up, that you'll be able to save more, that your car will not fall apart tomorrow, things like that. We live on a lot of faith. And and for some people, it's just nearly impossible to save, so they can't get ahead. Yeah.
Right. And so you get into that space of things like passive economy, residual economy, and all of that. So the point being that looking at the economy is really a big thing. It's a big deal. And I think people, so for example, we've talked about some of the videos that we've been looking at. Like I saw the one video with the young man who was a t-shirt person, right? He designed t-shirts. And he was engaged in a conversation with someone who was explaining to him about the tariffs, as an example, right? Explaining about the tariffs. And one of the things that he didn't realize or didn't really see himself as being a consumer who has a supply chain. And his supply chain was very simple. He orders blank t-shirts from China. And he gets those blank t-shirts and he produces his t-shirts here in the United States, right? His t-shirts from China up until now were only $10, right? Which means he would design it and then sell it to his customer for $20. So he's doubled, right? He's made a decent profit off of that. And then what he didn't understand was with a tariff, one possibility is that when your supplier is hit with a tariff, now they have to pay more. What are they going to do with that increased cost? They only have two choices: either absorb it themselves or pass it along to the consumer. You, my friend, are the consumer because you are purchasing those t-shirts. Those t-shirts now cost you $15. Are you still going to sell the t-shirts to your customers for $20, which means now your income is $5 less per t-shirt? And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pass it along, which means now that t-shirt that used to cost $20 now costs $25 because you have to pay more money, even though you're just a small person in terms of, bigger economy and all of that. You're just making t-shirts.
Right. And tariff was a big promise in the election.
Right.
Tariffs usually, go ahead, Gail.
I was going to say they usually contribute towards inflation, right? Which is what you're describing. Right. The cost of everything is going up. Yeah.
Exactly.
Competitors will raise their prices because this guy's charging $25 now, and up we go. Oh, it's not a good effect for any manufacturer of goods here.
But it's this idea of supply chain when you're in business. If you don't understand supply chain, because every single component in that supply chain that you have to use is going to impact your bottom line. And this was an example of a gentleman who did not understand that. His automatic assumption was that the supplier was going to be the one to absorb the cost. No, the supplier will absorb the cost and then they'll pass it along to you.
Well, in 2018-19, China did absorb the cost from the tariff that was placed at that time. Yeah, but I don't believe they're going to now.
Wasn't it just a time, for a period of time, that they absorbed it and then they changed the game?
Right, and then it changed. It's changing.
Okay. Yeah. Because it all boils down to how much money, like in other words, okay, when you look at China, we can absorb this, but we can only absorb it to a certain point. Because once we get to that point, now it's no longer benefiting us. It's actually hurting us. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to flip it and I'm going to pass that cost along to the consumer. And that's exactly the scenario that this gentleman was just wrestling with.
Right.
Yeah, maybe shocked by. And then, Trump was basically able to, capitalize on that dissatisfaction with the economy over increased prices and so on, in votes over inflation, which is not the proper cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
People were upset about the economy and thought this man will fix it for me, when in actual fact, a lot of his policies will have the opposite effect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're ready to talk about that yet or not.
No, that's fine. And I think for me, the thing is because the people have a very narrow picture of what the economy is.
Mm-hmm.
Like this gentleman here, he had a very narrow picture of what the economy is, right? And so if you're not thinking broadly, much more broadly in terms of understanding, here's this thing that impacts me, yet I don't know very much about it from a bigger perspective.
Right.
I don't know that much about it. And so I want to find out, like, if these tariffs happen, what is that? What is the potential that really has a potential to have on me?
We know what's going to happen because we know what happened with Trump when he and his administration, when they put tariffs on any imports coming in from China, and how that affected the economy. It's going to continue to affect the economy. And it's going to affect mostly the people that are in the lower socioeconomic groups.
Exactly.
They're the ones that are going to pay the higher prices if they want
at Walmart, right? At Walmart, all the Chinese goods.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so there's one other objective for microeconomics, and that is the consumer and producer welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Measuring and maximizing economic welfare for individuals and businesses or firms. Do we necessarily think about the economy in those terms?
Mm-hmm.
We really don't.
Yeah. I watched a TED Talk. This woman talked about the real indicators of success should not be GDP. They should be a decrease in poverty, an increase in education, a number of graduates, number of college graduates, a decrease in, the poverty in children. I would love to see those indicators, under the Wall Street Journal headlines. But it's much more financially related than it is qualitatively related to our lives here in this country.
Mm-hmm. And then before we go to break, I want to go back to some of the key objectives for macroeconomics. That economic growth, which is connected to the GDP, that gross domestic product, that's one aspect. Price stability, and that is controlling that inflation and deflation, which we mentioned earlier. The full employment, maximizing labor force utilization. Just think about that alone. And then balanced trade, equitable trade relations, and minimal trade deficits. But we live in a world now where trade is global. It's not just something that's isolated to the United States. We only do trade with people and businesses in the United States. It's global, right? So then you have that whole big thing that's there as well. So it's that macro as well as micro.
Right.
So we are going to take a relatively short break, about a minute or so. And this time when we come back, we want to talk a little bit more about that the economy is also personal. And I feel like in the election, people looked at it only being personal in the sense that I'm being impacted. But let's look at it personal in terms of what am I actually doing to maximize my own personal economy, right? So we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. So welcome back to Inflection Point Podcast and our community conversations for 2024. In today's episode, our topic of discussion is what's the deal with the economy? So we've been talking quite a bit on the first half of the show about the distinction between microeconomics and macroeconomics. And so we're kind of swimming around now in that microeconomic space, which I also kind of look at through the lens of what does your personal economy look like and how are you structuring your personal economy. And what we want to talk about is this idea of opportunity within the economy. And if you recall that was one of the platform, that was the main platform for Kamala Harris, that she was looking at it through a lens of creating an opportunity economy, because we already have that wealth economy that's there, right? But now she's talking about let's build out the middle class and raise up the lower class as well. And so that in that space, she put a lot of focus on opportunity. And for me, that really, really resonates. But first, you have to examine opportunity, right? And just really kind of think about, like, when you hear the word opportunity, what does that say to you, right? And then also, is there equality when it comes to opportunity? Now, we already know the answer to that question is no.
Yeah.
There is inequality when it comes to opportunity,
right.
But just really thinking about the word opportunity. I can honestly say in my life, I know there have been times when I passed up an opportunity. I know there was.
A good opportunity,
Yeah.
or one that you wished you'd taken? Or one that just wasn't right for you at the time?
No, one that I probably should have taken.
Okay.
Right. So I look at it, but then on the other hand, I took a major opportunity when I left corporate America.
Right.
Because when I left corporate America, I left the wage earner. I walked away from a six-figure income and, all of that. It was great. I had a wonderful time working. I can't even lie. I had a wonderful time working in corporate America. But also a lot of that was because I am the kind of person who takes advantage of opportunity. Not that I do that 100% all the time, but when I look at my career was in the pharmaceutical industry was driven by me taking opportunities. Like I took the opportunity to lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I took the opportunity to go to South Africa and implement a breast cancer awareness program. These were opportunities that I was presented with, and I took them. Mm-hmm. And so the question on the table is, if you're listening, is there a moment in time where you had an opportunity and you didn't take it? Whether it was fear, insecurity, whatever. For me, it was making that choice to come out of the lab, because it really took me a while to get to that place where I was ready to come out of the lab. Like I came into the pharmaceutical industry as a drug discovery
scientist.
Yep, drug discovery scientist. I want to do this for the rest of my life. Until I started to see, there's a glass ceiling here. And that glass ceiling is related to my education. I did not have a PhD in a scientific discipline. That was the block. So I stayed there.
Block. That's a major block for people.
In science research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe not that particular field, but I mean, for a lot of people who want to advance. But also, Anita, I think you have a pretty high tolerance for risk. And people have to have that if they want to.
I would agree.
Yeah, jump on the wagon, move, say, oh, I hope this is going to work. You have to. And then I think, too, you have to grow up in a home that reinforces your capabilities and tells you about the different opportunities in the world. If your community, your home life is kind of limited, you're not going to be exposed to all the different kinds of opportunities that are out there. You don't even know to look for them. Mm-hmm. you know, I'm saying that because of my growing up in a small town in Nebraska, and not until I went to college in big city Omaha did I get exposed to people from other countries and came up with other ideas for opportunities. So yeah, you have to seek them out if you're not finding opportunities that speak to you.
Exactly. Right? And you
and
have to
take some risk. Yeah.
You have to know yourself. On my coaching platform, that is the number one thing that I emphasize. You got to know yourself, your thoughts, beliefs, your ideas, right? Because I did not grow up in a home where I was surrounded by college educated people. Yet when I was like 5, I knew I was going to go to college. I don't even know where that came from. I don't even know where that came from, but I just knew I was going to go to college. I knew there's this thing called science that I really, really like. And I remember begging, one year I begged my mother to buy me a chemistry set. I was like 12. There were no chemists in my household. That was something that was somehow baked inside of me. And so I think it's important for us to really know who we are.
And you had a parent who nurtured that in you.
Supported you.
Even if it supported you, right. Even if it was just verbal reinforcement.
Right.
You know, and so those of us that are adults that are listening, think about how you're impacting your children. What Absolutely. Are you exposing them to about their potential to?
So it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I did, like way in the back of my mind when I was growing up, is that I had a running list, because I did not grow up in an ideal environment, I would say. But I had a running list of all the things that I experienced or that I saw that I wasn't going to do. Like, I'm not going to do that when I grow up.
I've got that list too.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I had this running list of things that I wasn't going to do.
That's true, Anita.
And so when I ended up having my own children, I remembered that list and I didn't do most of those things. That's not to say anything
to anybody else, right?
Or anything like that, but there were lots of things that were there. I mean, I experienced trauma and different things like that, but that's what I'm saying. You have to just know that there's something else innate inside of you.
Yes. Right.
And
a role for you in the world.
You believe that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived that. Yeah. I was 27 when I started my private practice, and I left a job with a major hospital in Pittsburgh. I was the director of counseling and ran that program for the behavioral science curriculum for family practice residents. And I did inpatient, outpatient, evaluations, and so I was training the residents, and they would not give me a raise. And I was working 60 hours a week, and I said, you know what? I can take the 5 people I'm seeing for counseling right now, privately, working there, and I could make more money than what they were paying me. They were paying me like $12,000 back in 1970, whatever it was, 77 and 79. And so I left, and my supervisors of graduate school had never started private practice. It was almost unheard of at that point in my age. And I knew I was taking a risk, but I knew I was determined not to be a victim to that type of corporation and those expectations and those judgments, right?
And the limitations.
And most of all, the limitations. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, I started my private practice. Now, and I'm grateful to myself that I did that. But it was a risk, But I knew what I wanted, and I knew who I was, and I knew how I wanted to be, and how I wanted to work as a therapist, and then continue my own education through that. And at one point, somebody asked me to do a radio talk show, and I had little kids. I was a single parent, and I said, I thought about it, and I said, you know what? No, because it would have taken me away too much from being with my kids and managing. It could have been a risk if I had taken, could have developed into many different avenues, but that risk I was not willing to take. The first one, I was.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head, and Mavis also said this early. It is risky.
It is. Yeah.
But at the same time, isn't it risky to be only dependent on this one wage earning thing that you have? Isn't there risk in that as well?
Of course there is.
Who can fire you in a minute?
Isn't there a risk in having this idea that it's the government that's supposed to make sure that I have a decent wage and all of that? Isn't that risky as well?
Sure.
Very, very.
So no matter how you look at it, there's risk involved when it comes to managing your personal economy.
Right. There's always
risk. I found that I'm more tolerant of the risks associated with my own decisions than depending on someone else and being limited.
Yes.
I'm just saying you're on your own, you're good. You're good. You can solve this. You can try something different.
That's right.
Because the interesting thing between all three of us is that we assume that risk. Each one of us had a role where we were in sort of that on the left side of the quadrant, employee, wage owner, good jobs and all of that. But each one of us came to that point where it was like, I want to have something different. 2013, I walked away from my corporate job. I didn't even know what I was going to do, but I knew eventually I was going to do something called life coaching. And that I was going to be a writer. But I just walked away. People looked at me like, you're crazy. But do I regret it today? No.
Yeah.
I don't regret it at all.
Good.
Am I where I want to be financially? No, I'm not there 100%. But am I willing to take opportunities to get me to where I want to be? That's what the difference is. So
Anita, would you point to that strategy for people who are in the lower socioeconomic brackets to entertain those ideas as a strategy to come up in the economy? I mean,
absolutely. Looking at other ways of making money, because in the United States, we're trained to think in terms of being a wage earner.
Right.
We're trained to think that way. Right?
So at least, our generation. Our generations were.
Absolutely. That's definitely a valid point. But that's how we were trained. And then you just kind of got to a point, like when we were talking earlier, well, you both know that I got married very recently. And part of us coming together was really looking at where we are in terms of our personal economy. He has a business, I had a business. And so now it's like, okay, now we have to figure out how we're going to manage both of these, but do them together. Right? Number one. And then number two, we decided that we were going to launch a business that we were launching together. Like he has his landscaping business, I have my coaching business, but we just recently decided to launch a business where we're building a network of home-based travel agents. I've worked in the travel space before as a network marketing and all of that, and I loved it. And so now here's another opportunity that landed for us to actually become business brokers who are dedicated to building a network of home-based independent travel agents. Like something like that is real.
Yeah. And it's an example of taking control over your own financial destiny.
Absolutely.
Making that choice. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's I definitely want to mention this book. There's a book, it's called Understanding Poor. And POOR, P-O-O-R, is an acronym for passing over opportunities repeatedly. And so I look at where we are right now under this new administration that's coming up. The way I look at it, we're basically on our own.
Yeah.
We're basically on our own. And we need to figure out within the context of who you are and your family and, all of that, what are you going to do to make sure that you are in a position to survive the next 4 years?
Yeah, we still have power. I really want people to think about the power that we still have as individuals and collectively.
Right.
Yeah. So the world is not ending. There are lots of different avenues to take a hold of the things that we fear now. One of them is calling your congressman, your senator, and really using your voice and taking advantage of opportunities, like we've been saying. I just, when you talk about the opportunity economy, I think of everyone should have opportunity to be employed, to have an income, to live with dignity, to cut out a whole section of the population as, not smart enough, not the right color, all these things costs everyone.
Right.
And it's just, it's despicable on many levels. But the other thing I want people to think about is ask yourself when you have enough, particularly the wealthy class. Do you have enough? Yeah, just ask yourself that question. Because there are ways for us to vote in a way that supports our society versus concentrating wealth in the top 1 or 2%.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to another topic, this idea of economic inequality. So Nobel Prize winning, there was a Nobel Prize winning economist, Joseph Stiglitz, who wrote a decade ago about a wealth and income gap in the United States that had been set in motion by years of policy decisions, but exacerbated by the 2007-2008 global financial crisis. So we all kind of remember that our 401ks went down and, all that sort of thing. But here's a quote from him. We have more inequality than any other countries and remarkably less equality of opportunity than almost every other country. He's a university professor at Columbia University, and this was a statement that he made in 2022 at an economic inequality lecture. And so that is something that has to be considered as well. The economic gap. Well, so we all know the gender gap. We know that's real. Women get paid less money in corporate America. That's real. We also know the racial gap. Same kind of thing. We know that these inequalities are there.
Right. Stiglitz also pointed out that inequality was once explained as a natural result of technological innovation that had increased demand for skilled labor and cut demand for unskilled labor. So I grew up in an economy that used a lot of unskilled labor. We believed anyone could get a job. That is a seismic shift in our world. And, people who are doing manufacturing jobs or, without college degrees and everything, that turn is like, turning the Titanic. It's very slow. And that creates more inequality because,
then on the other hand,
the services economy.
Right. Yeah. But then on the other hand, there are sectors outside of the tech world. If we just look at it and say everything's driven by tech, I go to Target every day. Well, not every day, but I go to Target regularly. There are regular people working in Target. They're not, you see what I'm saying? So I understand that people made that statement, but that statement in and of itself is eliminating half of the population that actually does exist, because we still have restaurant owners and we have waiters and waitresses that work in restaurants. We got people that work in McDonald's, right?
Right. But in general, you say those aren't living, but they're not living wages. They're not enough to support a family.
Sustaining themselves.
Right. So, both points are true that the technology has changed the type of jobs that are available in our country. And
but at the same time, it's the same.
Yeah, we still need. Well, it's like during the pandemic, it was the essential workers that we survived on. We survived on the wage earners. They kept coming to work.
Absolutely. At the same time, however, the technology enables people to have their own business.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you got people that have stores on, you got people that have Etsy and they sell their products on Etsy. You have people that sell products on Amazon. So I don't buy the argument that because we're getting more and more technologically advanced, that those opportunities are not going to be there for people who don't have those skills. I think that's bogus.
Well, the opportunities might be different, and I think they're different in a big way. But and also, the country doesn't have still at this point equal access to global access to the internet. I can even visit a friend, out on Cape Cod, and there's not access. So, in rural areas of Nebraska, you don't have the technology part of it. So, yeah, all things are changing.
So, but you're almost proving my point, because the point that I'm making is that the technology is not in every single sector, or every single population, or every single neighborhood. But those neighborhoods still need to thrive.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. And I need to grab those opportunities. Remember when we found out that even access to technology had a redlining effect to it?
Oh, yeah.
The technology was brought to areas that were not within the redlined areas first. Right. In other words, the white areas, the commercial areas and so on, but not the poorer areas.
It was divided up that way. Yes.
And that's still very real. Like when I go to Brooklyn, as an example, we got about 3 minutes left. When I go to Brooklyn, I always have internet issues in the house because the tower, it's a whole thing about the towers and all of that. So we are almost out of time. And so I just want to put this statement out. The election is over. So what is our call to action in our own personal economy and our understanding of opportunity? Because opportunities are there. Sometimes you just got to move your thoughts out of the way and start looking at things through a very, very, very different type of lens, right? And so I'm throwing that challenge out to people who may be out there listening to this. Open up your eyes and look for opportunities, because they're there. It's a challenge, absolutely. It's risky, absolutely, but they're there. And those opportunities that are out there can give you that space of having more control over your own personal economy. And so here's our closing quote. Society cannot work without addressing the racial disparities that undermine the functioning of its democratic and social institutions. The challenge of racial justice is actually the challenge of democracy. So this kind of ties back into the whole inequality that's built into the system, because we can't make society work unless we can address racial division, distrust, inequality, and racism. And this is coming from a gentleman by the name of Richard Banks, and he's a Stanford legal scholar. So all of these conversations that we're having, bottom line is racism is an issue, inequality is an issue, and we need to deal with it. Okay. So just relating this back to the Cairo question, will Cairo have to fight in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? I do not want that to happen. So I am already teaching Cairo this idea about opportunity. And what if we all did that? What if we all did that? So I leave you all with that question. And what is it that you are going to do to hold yourself personally accountable and responsible for your own life, number one, but for the future of our country, right?
Yes.
So thank you all for joining us in this episode of Inflection Point Podcast right here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time, as we continue our community conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.